in the 1960s showed that it was possible to place a mobile power supply into a person's body safely. With DBS currently, for example, the electrodes planted in a patient's brain are controlled by a small power source that's placed in a patient's chest. Today, a number of different brain stimulation therapies are used to help treat a variety of disorders. Aside from DBS, there's also electroconvulsive therapy, or ECT. This method is used to treat disorders like depression and schizophrenia. With ECT, an electrical current passes electrodes on a patient's scalp, triggering the brain to cause a brief seizure. We're still not exactly sure how ECT works in the brain, but it might involve changes in both neurotransmitters like dopamine and the brain's stress response. Likewise, a technique known as vagus nerve stimulation uses electrical pulses to stimulate the parts of the brain that are associated with seizures to treat epilepsy. It can also be used in other cases like severe depression. In this case, the pulses come from a device implanted in the patient's chest and stimulate the left vagus nerve, which passes a signal onto the brain. This nerve is part of the control system that helps the brain regulate involuntary actions like heart rate. It also acts like a freeway of sorts, sharing information from the brain to the heart, abdomen, lungs, and neck and back again. These pulses may help control or limit the effects of seizures by spurring neurons to release neurotransmitters that help to modify the excitability of certain cells, lessening or even stopping seizures. Electrical brain implants might sound like science fiction, but these techniques are grounded in pure reality. Brain stimulation techniques have radically improved how physicians treat neurological and mental health conditions. And as these technologies improve, neuroscientists will hopefully continue to develop more effective and less invasive treatments, truly changing the lives of countless people around the world.
Your brain sends electrical signals from cell to cell. That's part of what allows you to think and move and do pretty much everything you do. So it actually follows pretty logically to use electricity to help treat it. But how many other ways are there to alter the electricity in your brain? Turns out, a lot.
People around the world are strapping batteries to their heads to supercharge their brains. Seriously? This is a thing. It's called transcranial direct current stimulation, or TDCS, and it involves using electric currents to stimulate your brain. The companies that want to sell you TDCS devices claim that it has all kinds of benefits. They might say that it'll boost your memory and focus. Some even claim that it can do everything from treat depression to help you sleep better. If that sounds too good to be true, it is. The truth is a lot more complicated. Studies have found that TDCS might help with some things, but there's also plenty of controversy about it among scientists, and the jury is still out about how exactly TDCS affects the brain. Even though it involves electric currents, TDCS is a lot less intense than the kind of supercharged electric shocks used in electroconvulsive therapy. That's the morphine these devices are claiming. Entering the world of TDCS experimentation has a pretty low bar since headsets are fairly inexpensive. Unfortunately, that's made the literature a little messy. One problem is that we still aren't totally clear on what TDCS does to the brain on a physiological level. We do know that current can affect the way neurons fire, and researchers think that the mild current from the electrodes changes the membrane potentials of neurons, allowing them to fire more easily. The idea is that with enough stimulation and repeated exposure, the neurons that are getting the stimulation will start firing more. Over time, that might nudge damaged or underperforming brain areas toward functioning in a healthier way all by themselves. But this is all still the subject of some debate. One study published in 2016 used a cadaver to measure how much current from TDCS managed to travel through the skull to the brain. Electrodes placed on the inside of the skull showed that around 90% of the electricity applied through TDCS didn't get through at all. That study raised a few eyebrows, but according to a lot of TDCS experts, the findings actually made sense since live tissue is better at conducting electricity. Plus, there's a lot of evidence that TDCS affects brain function, so there must be some amount of current, however small, making it through. Which brings us to the other main problem when it comes to TDCS. We still don't exactly know what effect it has. A lot of TDCS studies are small pilot studies that need to be replicated before we can draw any conclusions from their results. And some aren't so tight in the methodology department. In meta-analyses that look at results across multiple TDCS studies, researchers have pointed out that the methods used in different studies are so inconsistent that it can be hard to compare them. There is some well-designed TDCS research out there, though, and based on those studies, researchers have found that it might be an effective treatment for mood disorders, psychosis, and dementia. It might even help people recover from strokes. A 2016 meta-analysis of 17 studies studies found that stroke patients who did TDCS treatments regained more motor function than patients in the control groups who did fake TDCS treatments. Scientists are also looking into TDCS as an alternative treatment for depression. A meta-analysis of data from 6 randomized control trials with 289 patients in all showed that TDCS relieved symptoms of depression even in people who'd felt no benefits from medication. But that's the thing. Researchers are still looking into all of this. TDCS seems like it could be really promising, but there's a lot that we still don't know. Sure, some studies have found that TDCS helps stroke patients recover their motor function, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it will give healthy people better motor function in general. Plus, these studies are done in a clinical setting, which is totally different from buying a device and giving yourself a TDCS treatment at home. If you put the electrodes just a couple centimeters off from the right spot, or the current is slightly lower or higher than it should be, you might end up stimulating your brain in a way that's completely different from what you wanted. So there is some solid evidence that seems to point to TDCS being a useful therapeutic tool in the future. Just maybe don't run electric currents through your brain on your own until we know a little more.
Some of the brain manipulations that scientists use regularly in rodents aren't ready for use in humans yet, if they ever will be. Right now, the role of this technology is helping researchers study the brain. To shed light on how the brain works, some researchers literally shine a light on the brain to manipulate it. Intrigued? Here's how it works.
You hear people make comparisons all the time about how your brain is like one big, ultra-sophisticated computer, and that's fine, but the idea really only goes so far. Because, you can't really program your brain like you can your desktop, which is kind of a bummer. I want to know Kung Fu, and if we could just get in there and start manipulating neurons, we could solve a lot of the struggles our brains and bodies cause. But what if we could do that? Recently, scientists working with mice have been able to send new signals into their brains, ones that seemed so natural, the mice may have no idea they
know. Like, by the way, after that, yeah, the revision, I just have to enjoy it. That's all. I'm missing this part. I just forgot to all the actual thing. Yeah, my friends, so it's not that big of a deal. It's a bit of a pain in the ass, but it's doable. Ja, het is mij. Amúgy is megnéztük, hogy megnyugtat, hogy értem, amit ír. Nem tudnék válaszolni, de értem, amit ír. Szóval... Eltűnik, hogy valóban. Akkor mi megcsak? Mondd ezt! Ja. Oh, wait. Okay. Right. 2-től tart a próba, szerintem 1 óra minimum. Szóval... Hát lényegében igen, és hogyha úgy van, akkor én még attól függ, hogy hány ember jön el holnap. De hogyha nem lesz senki a vége fel, akkor egyszerűen lezárom a programot, és én mehetek, tehát hogy... Valahova még mennénk-e, vagy csak mondjuk. De én csak kérdezném.
Oh no. I don't want to. I don't want to. This is gonna be awesome, but I don't want to. Just kill me now, please. I don't want to. Oh god, no. No, 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 no. Oh no, no, no. I have no clue what that is. I know. I'm gonna throw my. Oh god. Why am I like this? Someone please tell me. Oh no, no. Oh yeah. Now we're getting to the good stuff. Honestly, I'm not even surprised at this point. Probably for the best. That's the good stuff. Oh, fuck. Shit. Now this is... Wow. That's something, okay? I'm gonna give that. You cannot expect me not to be using this. Oh. No. No. I'm not doing that now. No. It's gonna be pixely because I don't care. But no, I'm not gonna be... Oh fuck, no. I'm not gonna be doing that now. I don't care. I'm not. No, leave me alone. No. 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 Leave me alone. There we go. That's way more than what I can do. Like, yo, that's some good shit. Shit my boots. Ooh, this is cool. Gente, tá muito.
A TikToker chugged 8 scoops of pre-workout supplement. This is what happened to his brain. J.A. is a 25-year-old man presenting to the emergency room unconscious. His mother, Karen, tells the admitting nurse that she found her son unresponsive on the floor. You see, J.A. was a fitness TikToker who was just trying to make it. He recently found out about dry scooping pre-workout supplement. This was a hot new trend where people would dump powder directly into their mouth in an effort to bypass the water and allow the body to digest it as soon as possible so that the pre-workout would hit harder. Clearly, this was nonsense intended to sensationalize an unnecessary class of supplement, but J.A. was determined. He was going to dry scoop pre-workout for a video to post and get 100,000 followers. After putting 2 scoops of pre-workout directly into his mouth, J.A. felt like he was choking. He felt the powder immediately coat his tongue and everything became dry. In an effort to not breathe in any powder, he closed his eyes tight and tried to swallow. The video he posted gained him so many likes and new followers that he knew he had to push it further to get his follower gains. He was going to do 4 scoops next and have the biggest workout of his life, all documented in the biggest video that he's made yet. Immediately after putting 4 scoops of pre-workout supplement in his mouth, J.A. had instant regret. He knew he was going to choke on it, and if he didn't do anything, he would breathe it in. He thought it'd be funny for the video to just chase it down with 4 more scoops already mixed in with water as he washed everything down and got ready for his workout. At the gym now, J.A. didn't feel well. The pre-workout he took was loaded with caffeine, creatine, and a Focus Energy blend made of a variety of things. He started sweating before he even started touching the weights. He felt jittery during his sets. He could feel his heart beating in his neck as his eyes started bulging out of his head. He knew he was wired, but it was hard to actually get anything done. And while he was doing one of his sets, he felt an instant headache break through. He posted his video online, but didn't follow any of the comments because he couldn't follow any of the comments. At home now, J.A. wasn't exactly sure what was happening as he stumbled around. And as his mom came up to see what the commotion was, she found her son huddled over on the floor as she calls for 911, and he's brought to the emergency room where we are now. At examination, no one knew that J.A. had chugged huge amounts of pre-workout supplement. Even if they knew, they'd have no idea what was really in that pre-workout supplement. What they did know was that he was unconscious and unresponsive. He wouldn't open his eyes, and when doctors and his mom tried calling out his name, there was no response. J.A.'s heart rate was high, his breathing rate was normal. When the nurse tried to take his blood pressure, the machine just kept cycling and it couldn't get a reading. When they tried to do it manually, the measurement came out 330/180, which is almost 3 times that of normal and so high that the blood pressure machine couldn't produce an actual reading. In a previously healthy 25-year-old man, one reason why his blood pressure is so high could be that he took something, but his screen didn't return anything for substances, so it didn't look like he took anything illicit. A blood test finds nothing abnormal either. They looked at his heart rhythm and noticed that along with his high blood pressure, his heart was beating erratically. All of these together could mean that this is a problem with just his heart, but something's wrong. When doctors looked at his pupils, they noticed that one was bigger than the other. And the heart doesn't control the eyes, the brain does. And if the brain controls the heart too, then could the brain be the cause of his problems? Doctors send J.A. to get a scan of his head. The images suggest that parts of his brain have been bleeding. Because the brain's enclosed inside a hard space, the skull, bleeding into the brain would mean that the brain's expanding. The bleed isn't going to magically stop itself when there's no more space left. It's just going to keep going and keep pushing the brain up against the sides of the skull until the blood vessels start to crush themselves as the brain folds on itself, causing permanent damage. Is there a way that doctors can temporarily shrink J.A.'s brain to stop this? Maybe. Body water is a little salty, meaning that it has some sodium in it. Cells have about the same amount too. This is important because wherever sodium is, water will flow towards it. In this small science experiment, I dissolve salt in this water and place it into a tube. I submerge the tube in a pool of water that has no salt dissolved in it, and you'll see that water follows into the tube. That water follows sodium. If the brain is swelling, then a temporary fix could be to infuse saltier water into JA. If the body water is saltier than the brain, then it would temporarily suck water from the brain to relieve the pressure because it's quickly expanding. But this is only a quick fix for now, as he's sent into the intensive care unit. Doctors still don't know that J.A. had chugged 8 scoops of pre-workout because there isn't anything in that supplement that anyone in a hospital would test for, except his mom pulls up his phone and finds the latest video that he posted. She showed the doctors, and while it gives them some clues as to what could have happened, their main priority is to see if there's anything that they can do to relieve the pressure that's been building up in his skull. Looking at the ingredients of the pre-workout supplement, 2 things immediately stood out. A single scoop has 200 milligrams of caffeine, which is around 2 cups of coffee. The recommended daily maximum for caffeine is 400 milligrams. If J.A. swallowed 8 scoops of pre-workout in just a few seconds, it means that the caffeine content that he took was equal to chugging 17 cups of coffee, and equal to 4 times the recommended daily limit. Caffeine is a stimulant and increases adrenaline in the blood, so it increases heart rate. It could explain why J.A. felt jittery. It increases blood pressure, which if high enough can stress the blood vessels to the point of rupturing the walls of those blood vessels, causing a bleed. But is caffeine alone enough to cause a blood pressure so high that the machine can't even read it? On the ingredients list was another listing named beta-phenylethylamine. It's featured prominently in the marketing materials of the pre-workout supplement. You may have heard of something called alpha-methylphenylethylamine, which sometimes goes by amphetamine, something that's used in the treatment of ADHD that's related to an N-methyl-alpha-phenylethylamine, methamphetamine. In this pre-workout supplement, the beta-phenylethylamine was described to be a focus maintainer to help promote mood, alertness, and concentration, similar to the function of amphetamine, but something's a little different here. In the brain, beta-phenylethylamine gets broken down or metabolized, but amphetamine doesn't get broken down in the brain. It stays in, and the body needs to wait to clear it out. This is a problem because in the synapse where nerves connect, chemicals normally send signals. When the signal is done, the synapse needs to clear itself so that signals aren't sent non-stop. This means that those chemicals that send the signals either need to be pumped back in or broken down. If a lot of amphetamine is present, the synapse doesn't get cleared. It keeps forcing more chemical out, sending signals non-stop, continuously stimulating the nerve. This is why we call it a stimulant. Amphetamine doesn't get broken down in the brain, so it stays there until it naturally clears out after a while. But beta-phenylethylamine, the chemical that was in J.A.'s pre-workout, is supposed to get broken down in the brain quickly. But when J.A. chugged and instantly swallowed 8 scoops worth of pre-workout, there could have simply been too much of it for parts of his brain to break it down quickly enough. This is a problem because that signal from the nerves also gets sent to the heart, telling it to beat harder and faster. Huge amounts of beta-phenylethylamine probably can't get broken down quickly enough, so the signals aggressively push into the heart, causing it to beat harder and faster. But it's not just the heart doing this. J.A.'s blood vessels are constricting too, and when they constrict as the heart is beating harder, this dramatically increases the blood pressure even more. The combination of huge amounts of caffeine and beta-phenylethylamine in 8 scoops of pre-workout swallowed all at once with heavy lifting all together could have increased J.A.'s blood pressure so high that it caused his brain to start to stroke in the form of a bleed. The dysfunction of the brain caused dysfunction in the heart, which was found first by the doctors as they were trying to figure out exactly what was going wrong. Doctors were able to prevent J.A.'s brain from pushing up against his skull and oozing out of the cracks. The surgeons removed parts of his skull to relieve the pressure building up in his head. But the images show that he didn't have any physical abnormalities that would have caused his brain to bleed like this. His past medical history also didn't show that he was susceptible to this because he was a healthy 25-year-old man. Despite the doctors and surgeons at this point really only caring to fix the problems caused by his brain bleed, the reality is, despite evidence strongly suggesting that caffeine and beta-phenylethylamine are documented to cause hemorrhagic strokes when taken inappropriately, there's always a little bit of doubt that it was absolutely those two alone that caused J.A.'s problems. You can't set up an experiment to test on people by giving them huge amounts of these things and waiting until their brains start to bleed because you're intentionally harming people. And you might not be able to fix the problems by doing that. Final problem of J.A.'s case. Supplements sometimes tell you on the label to consult a physician before taking it, that you should consult a physician before starting any exercise program. And the reason why you're probably going to be told to not take it is that we don't really know what's in here. Some of the brands might change the ingredients. We don't really know what's in these complexes and these blends and change the amounts of those ingredients, and they don't have to tell you about it. These complexes and blends might be sourced differently depending on what state or country that you're from. And some of these might be based off of herbal ingredients that interact with your liver and cause problems with actual medicines that you could be taking for an actual medical condition. This is coming from someone who is in medicine and also spent like 15 years of my life in powerlifting circles. I stepped on the platform to compete. I used to take supplements. And when I was competing, pre-workouts like this were just becoming a thing. Not many of us took it where I was, and we certainly didn't dry scoop it. There's no such thing as bypassing water to digest it faster. There is such thing as bypassing the liver, but that would imply that the pre-workout is being absorbed into your blood directly through your cheeks and under your tongue, which for granular powder like this isn't happening. You're voluntarily creating a choking hazard for yourself by doing this. It's a troll. If dry scooping is somehow a convenience for you in some way, that's great, but don't lie to yourself thinking that taking it that way is doing something special. If you're really training seriously, you shouldn't need anything extra to help you focus on training because this is a non-essential supplement. JA may not have had the support structure of a team at a gym to gain that insight, but the label of the pre-workout also says don't take more than 2 scoops in a given day. Don't push it with this kind of stuff. When stabilized after surgery, J.A. was moved into a step-down unit where he appeared to improve, likely thanks to the fact that he was younger, previously healthy, and his stroke may have been caught just in time. He was moved to a rehabilitation facility afterwards, and after several months of care there, he was able to make a recovery. Thank you so much for watching. Take care of yourself, and be well. Hey, Dr. Bernard here. Don't do what this person did. The chemical he took, at least in the bodybuilding and powerlifting circles I knew in Illinois about 15 years ago, they generally avoided it. So medically and personally, I'm telling you, don't do it. This person's also a YouTuber and he talks about his whole case there too. Check him out, link in the description below. A man had a life-threatening accident with a fat-burning chemical. This is what happened to his organs. CE is a 22-year-old man presenting to the emergency room unconscious. His brother-in-law tells the admitting nurse that he found CE naked in the shower on the floor while cold water was running all over him. When paramedics arrived, CE demanded they go away, refusing to get into the ambulance. And when he arrived to the emergency room, flowing in and out of consciousness, he refused to tell doctors what exactly had happened. CE was a college student who enjoyed fitness. When he was in elementary school in the early 2000s, he got bullied.
Most of middle school, I was pretty much bullied relentlessly. I was kind of on the shorter side. I was overweight, very nerdy, didn't have a lot of friends.
When he got to high school, he started lifting weights for football. He gained muscle. No one was going to bully him anymore.
I came into 9th grade and no one recognized me. I looked radically different and I was starting to really grow into my body through weightlifting. And for me, weightlifting saved me from bullying. It saved me from being an outcast.
One day when CE was 17, his dad suddenly passed away.
It was completely unexpected. You know, one morning he's fine. I go to school. The next thing I know, I'm getting pulled out of school and my father's gone. I really blamed myself for the death of my father. His sudden passing threw me into into this pain and loss. And the second that happened, everything else didn't really matter to me anymore. The next thing that happened is I started binge eating to try to fill that void.
Eventually, CE's physical body responded to all of this. He saw it as a direct response to coping with everything. He justified to himself that if he were to lose all of the weight, that it would be like redeeming himself. He started by heavily restricting his food. He would go on hours-long bike rides. He would skip class to be at the gym for hours every day. And he did get results, no matter how tough it was on his body. Eventually, CE plateaued, and his body adapted to the conditions. Looking for ways to keep going, he found a next step. He was going to have chemical assistance.
It was never a gradual thing. It was an immediate jump into that. And that's when I started kind of looking for ways to supplement that weight loss through supplements.
On a bodybuilding forum, CE read about stimulants and thyroid hormone as a way of increasing the body's metabolism. That'll burn fat, they said. He was able to buy them online and use them in combination together. He got some results from them for a while, but it wasn't enough. Back online, CE found out about a chemical named 2,4-dinitrophenol, DNP.
So once again, I turned back to these bodybuilding forums, and at that point I had heard of DNP, but it wasn't really talked about. But someone had mentioned it, and I started looking up DNP. You know, the stories you hear immediately are both extremes. You hear about people dying, but you hear about people losing 10, 15 pounds in the course of like a week or two. Looking at everything in that place of desperation, seeing 3 or 4 different YouTubers at the time, all these forum posts of people being like, yeah, you know, DNP's tough to be on, but like, I did it, it's fine, you'll be fine, sort of thing. I decided to make the commitment and find a source for it.
To someone doing their own research online, this was a compound to get the job done, and CE started taking DNP. Immediately after taking a dose of his new weight loss chemical, CE felt hot. He wouldn't stop sweating. It got to the point where it became socially unacceptable because he would just sweat everywhere in class and in front of his friends. He would blast the air conditioning fans blowing all on him, but his body temperature only stayed high. Every time he took it, it put him in a world of pain. The internet forums told CE to be careful of the dose of DNP he was taking, but they always came back and said, "Don't worry about it, you'll be fine." But one day, 8 months later, CE wasn't fine. In the morning, he took his dose, which should have been it for the day, but then he took a nap and woke up confused and took a second dose, thinking it was his first again, and that was the last thing that he'd remember for the next several days. In the afternoon, CE's brother walked into the house. He heard that the shower was on, bathroom door was open. He found CE on the floor, naked and groaning as cold water was running all over him.
My brother-in-law walks by and immediately knows something is wrong. And all I would get out is, get me Coca-Cola and a milkshake from Steak and Shake. Because at this point, my body is ravaging every store of energy I have. And he went out and got it. By the time he came back, I had lost responsiveness. And so he calls the paramedics. I was under the assumption that ownership of DNP is illegal, was also very stubborn. So to admit that I was in any kind of danger was difficult. And also I didn't really want to incur that financial cost of an ambulance ride. And so I sent them away. But once again, I lost consciousness. And once again, my brother-in-law finds me and he calls the paramedics a second time.
The brother-in-law asks what was wrong, but he couldn't get a coherent response as he calls for 911 and CE is brought to the emergency room where we are now. At examination, CE is sweaty, confused, and trembling. He's in respiratory failure, but his measured body temperature is normal, and a blood test finds that his kidneys and his liver are shutting down. CE drifts in and out of consciousness. He has periods where he can be responsive, but he won't tell doctors exactly what he had taken because he was scared that he would get in trouble. CE thought it was illegal to take DNP, but in the United States, it's unlawful to manufacture, market, and sell for human consumption. So he probably wouldn't have gotten in trouble, but the people who sold it to him could. Usually, in a previously healthy 22-year-old man with no past medical history who's sweaty, in respiratory failure, with a fast heartbeat, The first thing doctors think of is stimulant use. Being the end of summer, this is especially dangerous because stimulant substance deaths have a higher incidence on days when it's hot outside because that increased ambient temperature makes it harder for one to dissipate heat caused by the intake of a stimulant, but CE's urine screen returned nothing. As the hours pass, CE's body temperature starts to rise. He's transferred into the intensive care unit because his organ shutdown was getting worse. All of this happening while he was intermittently combative with medical staff. They sedate him and stick a tube down his throat so that a machine could breathe for him. This medically induced coma could help the medical team somewhat, but with his body temperature quickly rising, his proteins start to deform. Basic bodily functions no longer happen. It's like his body is cooking itself alive, and this is life-threatening if nothing is done about it immediately. Doctors still have no idea what CE had taken. His brother-in-law had no idea either. Problems like his kidneys and liver shutting down and high body temperature usually correct when the underlying problem is fixed. But without knowing what CE had taken, there's no way for doctors to fix that underlying problem. If they knew, they could give an antidote or they could give something that could reverse and counteract everything that is happening, but they didn't know. In the intensive care unit, doctors place cooling pads on CE to try to lower his body temperature. They hydrate him with chilled IV fluids to push water into his kidneys. Both of these help his fever and his kidney failure directly, but they don't fix the underlying problem. And finally, CE's brother breaks the silence and tells doctors about the DNP that CE had been taking for weight loss for at least the last 8 months. This was in addition to other fat loss substances, including thyroid hormone, ephedrine, and clenbuterol. And this explains to doctors exactly what is happening. DNP is 2,4-dinitrophenol. People know the word nitro and associate it with explosives, like nitroglycerin, the thing that goes boom in dynamite, or a nitro engine in a car. Dinitrophenol can also be explosive, and if nitroglycerin is used today to treat chest pain and heart problems, then dinitrophenol could have biological activity too, right? Explosions are a quick release of heat, and CE's body is hot, and doctors can't cool him down fast enough. DNP isn't exploding in his body, but it's doing something. The mitochondria, powerhouse of the cell, produces energy for the body. To produce energy means creation of heat. But how exactly is that energy made? This brings us to a concept called a gradient. Protons, also known as hydrogens or acid, get pumped out from the mitochondrial matrix. This is a place where important chemical reactions happen. When protons get pumped out of the matrix, they accumulate in this intermembrane space. This creates tension. Nature prefers a relaxed state. To be relaxed means to be perfectly balanced, as all things should be. But if more protons are sitting on one side, then that means that a gradient exists. Those protons will want to spread out and be less crowded, so they'll want to move back into the matrix, back to the side with less protons. But something's wrong. In living systems, most chemicals that have a charge, positive or negative, can't just cross through a membrane on their own. Cells don't let charged chemicals in. Protons have a positive charge, so they can't just cross back into the matrix. And the mitochondria is smart. It allows those proteins back into the matrix, but only if they go through a specific pore. And in going through this pore, those protons are exploited and used to create adenosine triphosphate, ATP, which is the energy created by the powerhouse of the cell. But what happens if a chemical like DNP isn't charged at first, so it can cross freely through the cells to bring protons into the matrix? And then it leaves somehow, but then it comes back with more protons. And it keeps doing this until there's no more gradient. Then protons don't want to move because things are already balanced and relaxed. Then the mitochondria can't exploit them anymore to create energy. This could be what happens. I explain more on my second channel, Heme Review, why I have some questions about this idea. Add it to your Watch Next queue if it's in your recommended, or check the link in the description below. If mitochondria is short-circuited by DNP and it can't exploit protons to make ATP, then it needs to do other things to compensate for this loss in energy production. Sugars are a good source of energy, so break them down faster to keep up. One reason why we have fat tissue in our body is to have stored energy. And if the mitochondria is desperate to keep up energy production, then it needs to start burning those stores because cells start to panic. Dinitrophenol has stopped the normal process. All of this creating heat. And because CE took multiple doses accidentally, this process is amplified, creating even more heat as his body starts cooking itself alive. The internet forum was right. DNP burns fat. It burns sugar in the muscles. It blows up the process to make energy. The energy expenditure dissipates as heat. At some doses, it's uncomfortable, socially unacceptable sweating. At high doses, it's hyperthermia. Hyper meaning high, and thermia referring to heat or temperature of the body. High body temperature to the point of denaturing enzymes and proteins and shutting down the organs. But this isn't the only thing raising CE's body temperature. His brother told doctors that CE had also been taking thyroid hormone. This increases the body's metabolism, gets used in some circles to help boost weight loss. Ephedrine also raises body temperature, and clenbuterol is a chemical used that moves the body towards fight-or-flight mode, which would cause it to be more active to burn more energy and thus result in higher body temperature. So you can see a common theme here. The idea of using a chemical to boost metabolism to help lose weight isn't new. The simplified version is if you can expend more energy per day than you put into your body, then over time, you will start to dig into the energy stores of your body, the fat tissue, and then start to lose weight. It's more complicated than that, but let's keep it there for now for simplicity's sake. You can put in less energy to your body daily. We call that dieting. You can expend more energy. We call that exercising and being more active. The problem is that people often jump right into it and suddenly drop their calories from whatever thousands per day to, let's say, 400 calories a day. They go super hard on the exercising on day one. They don't even ease themselves into it, and they'll get good results for a couple of weeks, but then they plateau, and then they stop making progress. There's no more room to make changes, and even if they try to exercise harder, they could get physically sick. At this point, just after a few weeks, the worst part is they may not have even actually burned off fat tissue, just the sugar stored in the liver and in the muscle. That's tied to water, so if one checks the scale every day, and I would suggest checking less frequently, that's where they're going to see their progress in the numbers alone. And being burned out means that they'll start relaxing, or they might quit altogether and then rebound, and then they'll say that it never worked. When you diet, start easy. Give yourself many options to change, and then tighten as time goes on. It can be as simple as removing a sauce that you normally eat at lunchtime, or removing a quarter of your dinner, running that change for a week, and then reassessing afterwards. It's at the plateau point that some people will seek outside help if they don't quit. They go to online forums or they ask people at their gym. Some will get supplements that you can buy at the store, which I would be careful with, and some others get into the hardcore stuff, bringing us back to CE. In the intensive care unit, doctors have no antidote for DNP. There's no way to suck it out of his mitochondria. Whatever he took, his body will need to pass it on his own. And while that's happening, doctors can treat the symptoms, but there isn't much else that they can do. Except, maybe there is one thing. Doctors use a medicine called dantrolene, which can be used in the setting of hyperthermia. This medicine supposedly prevents calcium from getting released into the muscle cells. Calcium causes the muscle to commit to a contraction, which by itself would create heat. Calcium also sends inside signals to cells, which in this case could help lower heat production there. Every little bit can help. It doesn't always help, but maybe it's in the cards for CE. 5 hours after the first dose of dantrolene, CE's hyperthermia resolved, and it never came back. Over the next 36 hours, 4 more doses were given. On the 4th day after presenting to the emergency room, the tube that was down his throat was pulled out by him as he regained consciousness. The thing about admission into the intensive care unit is that for several days you're not really moving. You're sedated and a machine is breathing for you. You're fed nutrients intravenously, and it's the bare minimum to keep you alive. As a result, even though CE is muscular and was fit, he is going to need physical therapy for at least the next several months because of muscle breakdown that happened in his body, not because of the DNP alone, but because of how tough it was to keep him alive in the ICU. I don't recommend anyone take this stuff from a medical standpoint that I've seen, and from a personal standpoint, having been in this world earlier in my life. And I know someone's going to say that this is no more dangerous than taking aspirin. They could be right, except the incentive for taking aspirin is to relieve pain. Once the pain is gone, you don't want to take more. But the incentive for DNP is that you take it to lose weight. There's no telling where the bottom is. So even if the weight is gone, one could just keep taking and taking because the fundamental reason is different than aspirin. Someone making that argument might not agree, but I know someone who can speak from their own experience.
I just want to really highlight how I shouldn't be alive today. Had I lived alone, I would have been dead. Had my brother-in-law just left me alone in the shower, I would have been dead. Had I just gone up to my room instead of going into the shower, I wouldn't be here. You know, so many people die from this drug and don't have the opportunity to tell this story. I'm sure there's a lot of people that take it, safely and have good experiences with it, but it's such a gamble and it's such a risk. The second you take DMP, you're strapping yourself into an experience that has to run its course. When you go into the ER with a knife wound, a gunshot wound, all those medical professionals know what they're dealing with. They know how to save your life. You go in and you won't tell the doctors you're on DMP. They've never even heard of DMP before. You're putting yourself at a significant disadvantage to getting medical care. Yes, DMP is this super, kind of tempting idea of radical weight loss. But it's interesting because if you are the kind of person that struggles to lose weight in other ways, there's the extreme hunger that you'll experience with DMP. There's the misery that you'll experience with DMP. So it's not nearly the promised miracle chemical that you're believing in. I strongly advocate to create healthier relationships with your body, create healthier relationships with your mind, explore weight loss in terms of changing things for the better. And that's what will lead to sustainable and healthy, kind of change in your body.
After an ICU admission, a lesson learned about messing with fat loss chemicals, and a continuing journey of self-improvement, CE made a full recovery, and you can see him on his YouTube channel, link in the description below. The full interview with CE is on my Heme Review channel here. Thank you so much for watching. Take care of yourself and be well. A man drank 2 liters moonshine in 2 hours. This is what happened to his eyes. CS is a 31-year-old man presenting to the emergency room with body pain, nausea, and blurred vision. He tells the admitting nurse that he slept poorly the previous night and suffered severe abdominal cramps before seeing his vision distort and warp. You see, that previous night, CS was participating with friends in a New Year's Eve BYOB power hour, where each person and take a half shot on the minute, every minute, for a whole hour. CS didn't want to just bring his own liquor. He was going to make his own liquor. He received a distillation kit a few weeks prior as an early Christmas gift from his girlfriend. He had brewed his own beer before, but wanted to move towards moonshine or homemade whiskey from grains after seeing some videos on the internet. Unlicensed distillation is federally unlawful, but he thought to take his chances. He was sure he followed the directions to ferment and distill correctly and didn't do anything wrong. As the batch was made, CS began the New Year celebrations with friends. He didn't like the taste of his moonshine and was pretty vocal about it. After all, it was 160 proof or 80% alcohol, double his friend's store-bought 80 proof liquor. He was a good sport and partied on with his friends, and they were having a great time celebrating the New Year's, and CS proceeded to finish all 2 liters moonshine that he brought within 2 hours. As the night continued, CS felt increasingly ill. His vision started vignetting, darkening, and blurring on the sides. His sense of sound began to flow into a sea of molasses as it slowed and warped. He thought because he drank 160 proof moonshine that he was just more drunk than normal. He went to bed not eating anything, but also not feeling great, and as he got started the next day, his vision quickly went dark, and he called for an ambulance where he's brought to the emergency room where we are now. Before the nurse could do a physical exam on CS, he asked to use the restroom. He was in for about 10 minutes, the bathroom door still closed. Medical staff thought to ask and see if anything was wrong, and when they received no response, they entered and found him on the floor, foaming at the mouth and seizing as he was huddled over the toilet. As the seizure resolves, he's unresponsive, pupils dilated and unreactive to light, respiratory rate 28 breaths per minute, double that of normal. His Glasgow Coma Scale, an objective measure of his consciousness and indicator of brain injury, is rated at just 4. 1 point above complete unresponsive coma. There's indication here that he has an injury, but something's wrong. If from just alcohol or more formally ethanol intoxication, then the seizure doesn't make sense. Ethanol is a nervous system depressant, meaning that it slows down the brain and displaces excitatory neurotransmitters. Because he was convulsing during the seizure, we classify it as generalized tonic-clonic. Tonic and clonic deriving from ancient Greek words tonos and clonus, which mean to stretch with violent and confused motion. Generalized meaning that the seizure, which is a state of excessive excitation, is affecting the entire brain. This is opposite of nervous system depression, so we can say with certainty that ethanol is not directly responsible for his seizure. A blood test reveals that the pH of CS's blood is 6.5. That's 8 times more acidic than normal, and he's transferred to the intensive care unit as he's suffering from metabolic acidosis. Osis meaning abnormal state, and acid being a chemical that donates hydrogen ions, something when in large abundance can impair the normal function of your body. Metabolic meaning that it's deriving from cellular processes that produce energy or break down substances. With a pH of 6.5, we can conclude that CS is suffering from profound acidemia, an acid presence in blood. If, since last night, nothing entered CS's body except for 2 liters of moonshine and water, neither of which are strong acids, and nothing left his body except for some urine, then how is it possible for so much acid to be in his blood? Was there something else in that moonshine? Well, there's a bit of basic biochemistry to be known here. To make moonshine, CS used yeast to ferment oat sugar or glucose. Fermentation is the anaerobic or without oxygen consumption of glucose, producing an unrefined beer called a wash. Because glucose is a chain of 6 carbons, the yeast will produce alcohol chains of less than 5 after we account for carbon dioxide produced. This means that ethanol at 2 carbons is very common, yielding at 10 to 15% in wash, but it also means that the 1 carbon methanol, which is not safe for human consumption, is produced too. And even worse, CS used his distillation kit to produce his concentrated 80% ethanol drink. Distillation separates chemicals and is started by heating the wash. Ethanol boils at 173 degrees Fahrenheit, which means at this temperature, its vapor pressure is equal to the pressure exerted on it by the surrounding atmosphere, meaning it will phase shift from liquid into gas. Because water boils at 212 Fahrenheit, then heating to 173 boils the ethanol but not water, turning the alcohol into gas, which will rise up in the still where it's collected, condensed, and cooled back into liquid in a separate container, creating moonshine. The problem with this is that methanol's boiling point is 149 degrees Fahrenheit, lower than ethanol's. So heating to 173 boils it too and collects and concentrates it into the moonshine. Methanol collects in the head, or the first part of the distillate, and it's apparent that CS drank a lot of it because a blood test reveals that the methanol concentration in his body is 420 milligrams per deciliter, more than 10 times the minimum documented lethal dose. Methanol doesn't look much different from ethanol, physically and chemically. Estimating his blood volume at 6 liters because of his weight of 80 kilograms measured at admission, this means that there are 25 grams of methanol floating around in his blood. Given that the density of methanol is about 0.8 grams per milliliter, this means that there is about 30 milliliters, or 2 tablespoons full, in his blood at the moment. Like ethanol, methanol is also a weak acid, but 30 milliliters alone isn't enough to cause profound acidemia. It's also physiologically inactive by itself in humans, so how could it be causing these problems in CS? Well, let's go back to the name of his condition, metabolic acidosis. If methanol isn't a strong acid, then how exactly is methanol getting metabolized? In humans, alcohols are metabolized twice, mainly in the liver. It appears that humans evolved this mechanism because the bacteria in your gut ferments sugars. That's the same fermentation that CS's yeast did with oat sugar, and means that small amounts of alcohol, about 3 grams, are produced in your gut every day. The first step of alcohol metabolism is where an enzyme called alcohol dehydrogenase converts it to aldehyde. Ethanol becomes ethanal, which is responsible for hangovers and flushing while drunk. Methanol becomes methanal, which is formaldehyde, used to embalm mummies and is a likely carcinogen. This first step is fast and causes a buildup of aldehyde in the body, explaining delayed onset of hangover after a night of drinking. The second step is when aldehyde dehydrogenase converts aldehyde to carboxylic acid. So ethanal is metabolized to ethanol vinegar, but methanal is metabolized to methanoic acid, which is a major poison. But it's not the acid moiety of methanoic acid causing CS's metabolic acidosis, but rather the effect that it exerts on the body. Your cells need oxygen to produce energy. The enzyme cytochrome oxidase is a major part of this metabolism and relies heavily on oxygen to function. Methanoic acid binds into cytochrome oxidase and doesn't let oxygen in and forces the cell to operate anaerobically and produce less energy, all without oxygen. When cells are asphyxiated like this, they produce lactic acid from the glucose that they're trying to metabolize into energy. It's this methanoic acid being produced from methanol metabolism that's choking his cells of oxygen and forcing them to produce acid, causing CS's metabolic acidosis and profound acidemia. In looking at his physical condition, where would this starvation of oxygen have the greatest impact? Well, it's probably not the muscles, since they're designed to tolerate lactate, which is produced during exercise when a transient oxygen deficiency is common. It couldn't be the liver, as it can process and break down some of these acids. But how about the brain? The brain is metabolically active, and short amounts of time with ischemic event, when oxygen flow or utilization is blocked, can cause excitotoxicity, an overexcitation of the brain, which includes seizure. A brain MRI for CS reveals hypoxia, or low oxygen, in the basal ganglia, which connects major parts of the brain together. Methanoic acid is known for its selective absorption into eye tissue and the optic nerve, where it builds up, starves the cells of oxygen, and causes them to necrose, or die, as they literally digest themselves from inside out. Hyperemia, or an abundant presence of blood, was found in CS's eye, along with edema, or fluid swelling, all explaining why CS's vision was deteriorating since he started drinking and suddenly lost his vision as he presented to the emergency room. If left untreated, he will first go permanently blind as his optic nerve is choked out and deprived of oxygen, causing irreversible nerve damage. After that, his brain will begin to hemorrhage and bleed out and necrose as it starves for oxygen and swims in a pool of its own dead cells. The notion of enzymatic activity modulating or causing toxicity by its action or lack thereof is a recurring physiologic theme. Both carbon monoxide and cyanide have the same mechanism as methanoic acid. They block oxygen from binding to cytochrome oxidase, preventing cells from using oxygen, causing an overproduction of lactic acid, causing metabolic acidosis, necrosis, and eventually death. Medicines are sometimes given in prodrug form, meaning that they're inactive when taken orally but metabolized by the liver into active form. For example, the blood pressure medication enalapril is converted to biologically active enalaprilat, which inhibits the angiotensin-converting enzyme, preventing activation of the hormone angiotensin 1 to its vasoactive form, lowering blood pressure. This specific use case in humans derived from the Brazilian pit viper, whose venom was designed to fatally lower blood pressure of its prey, typically of small mammalian descent, meaning that the idea of enzymatic activity transcends species. When dogs eat chocolate, they consume theobromine, a chemical similar to caffeine that causes tremors and acts as a stimulant. Humans metabolize theobromine in the liver enzymes, but dogs do not have these enzymes, so they break it down very slowly, if at all, meaning that the theobromine accumulates, causing overstimulation, increasing heart contractility, increasing adrenaline levels, causing hyperthermia, rigidity, tremors, seizures, and death. With methanol, the exact opposite is happening. Methanol is physiologically inert and only produces mild sedation. It's already water-soluble, meaning that it can dissolve in the urine as is and be excreted by the kidneys, but its metabolites are poisonous. If enzymes can be competitively inhibited like cytochrome oxidase, is there a way that we could prevent methanol from binding to alcohol dehydrogenase and stop it from being metabolized? Yes. Ethanol binds to alcohol dehydrogenase with a greater affinity than methanol, and it does so competitively, meaning that it'll prevent methanol from ever binding to the enzyme's active site, preventing it from metabolizing. This explains partly why CS's symptoms were more mild while he was still drunk the previous night with ethanol still in his blood, and it means that the antidote for his poisoning is more ethanol. He's put on dialysis, as well as given sodium bicarbonate, a base to correct his acidosis. A 10% ethanol IV infusion is administered. Plasma methanoic acid concentrations were monitored and shown to fall after ethanol administration, along with spontaneous resolution of his metabolic acidosis and improvements in his mental status. As documented in the literature, the elimination half-life of methanol in the body after discontinuation of dialysis was 54 hours, as the methanol dissolved in CS's urine and was excreted through the kidneys unmetabolized. Halting the production of methanoic acid, if caught early, can reverse the ischemic and hypoxic damage caused by the poison, as enzymes are not consumed in the chemical reactions in which they participate. CS's story is a fine example for reasons why alcohol distillation without permit is federally unlawful in the United States. It's a common international travel tip to be careful of cheap liquor in some countries because it could have been bootlegged and adulterated to be contaminated with methanol, poisoning hundreds, if not thousands of people, as the toxicity and irreversible injury can happen in as little as a couple milliliters. Furthermore, ethanol was used as